guys in this movie who did this one guy got brought in late and he had to manage 18 VFX companies to get this movie done. These people didn't have enough money. They had to utilize all these matte paintings. They wanted everything in the shot, everything in frame. So if you watch this movie, there's so many matte paintings. There's a lot of just like what's real, what's not. They wanted everything in camera. But once again, man, that attention to detail and the flooding, I think, kept from the characters, I would have to say. Like, it seems like the attention went to everything else but creating characters that mattered when they died.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because this film does look really good. The costuming does look really good. There's some, frankly, weird CGI moments in it. Particularly, there's a scene at the end where they, I guess, blue screened, maybe green screened a guy to hit Shane West. Oh my God, Tom Sawyer. That was actually bizarre. It looked horrible. But the costuming, the clothes look superb, and I completely agree with that.
You hear her talking about every little piece of fabric that she ordered from Italy, Japan, Hong Kong. I mean, it's pretty cool how they talked about it. And also, what do you think about the look of Jekyll and Hyde, or Henry Jekyll, Edward Hyde? He was basically so his muscles didn't move when he's on camera, and the guy kind of lamented that a little bit. But they also don't kind of pull. They also look good, I would say, on him. What do you think about his practical effects, special effects on Jason Fleming?
I think I like them because I listened in the producer's commentary. They talked about why they went practical, and they went practical so they purposely didn't look like the Hulk movie that was coming out, and they also didn't have the budget. So they were like, this is how it's going to be. It's going to look different this way so we don't get compared to this other movie. And I think I really, really like that choice. Going back to your comment about characters, like really the only character that I had a strong connection to was Nina Harker and her story with Dorian Gray, because I knew that was going to lead up to some awesome fight. And frankly, I think it did.
The bedroom fight. That was cool. I felt bad for Peta Wilson, man. Like, they're like, I didn't want her at first. We had Monica Bellucci, but she said no. So we're stuck with Peta Wilson. And then she's on the boat, and then she has Jekyll hitting on her. And then she has Tom Sawyer hitting on her, and then she has Dorian Gray hitting on her, and then I'm saying for the first half hour, Sean Connery's just like, "Yeah, lady, I've already buried 2 wives, and I just don't want to bury another. What are you doing here? Are you his wife?" Like, you're Connery, man. Like, they make him so likable. So if you're gonna, that's another thing about his character. He didn't want to be all bad and all good. So when he comes across as super sexist, you're like, like. I don't know. He was just really... and we're also looking at the times, the 1900. He's a man's man who goes and hunt and murders, animals that aren't endangered yet. But I didn't enjoy that. He was just dunking on her for the first half hour.
Yeah, that's very on point for the comic. Like Quartermain in the books is sexist. I mean, basically every character in the book is sexist, and I think that's the joke in the comic, at least the first volume, is that the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is led by a woman.
Got it. And listen, it is 1900. These are big talents. But I have a question. In the movie, they seem much more likable than in the comics, from what I've read.
Oh, yeah, we could talk about the comics, and I'll get to that question. So just for your audience, I read the first volume. Literally, I got done 10 minutes before this podcast started, so still fresh in my mind. Most of the characters in the comics are unlikable. I actually really dislike it, and I'm shocked that it was made into a movie. But again, like we covered earlier, it was sold and then they rushed it to production, so like they didn't get to see it, like how it would do in the real world. But yeah, like Rodney Skinner, who's the visual man is horrible in the comics. Absolutely, like a degenerate, like almost put me off on issue 1. I was like, I do not want to read this because there are, trigger warning, multiple rape scenes in the first 2 issues. Yeah, it's really, really a lot. But I would say that Nina's character is significantly more interesting, like 100% more interesting in the comic books.
Does she look like Winona Ryder?
A little
Nice.
bit. Yeah. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde's character is significantly more interesting. His is probably the closest to the comic. The movie's the closest to the comic of the characters, because Alan Quartermain in the comic is addicted to opium when you first meet him. And I guess you mentioned this, but we should just get out of the way. Like, the comic really centers on Mina gathering this team to thwart this threat. So she is sort of the central character, and these other characters float around. Dorian Gray isn't in the comic, at least the part I have read, and neither is Tom Sawyer.
So this movie, okay, and this is when things get me, and this is why Hollow Man gets me, where I love it when movies are either all in or they don't go for it. I don't like it when it's a half and half, because then it's such a jarring difference between them, if that makes sense. So that movie, I Saw the Devil, Korean film that destroyed my life, and I think it's amazing. That movie goes for the brutality and the meanness, and it almost transcends, I guess, to a certain extent. And so that's why I dig that. But then there's also PG rated movies that are just nice. You can just watch them and they're nice. So this movie, you have a bunch of these sexist characters, but then they're also mentors and nice guys. And you're kind of thinking, like, this is a weird... Does that make sense? And I'm not saying just change the past. Yeah. Like, obviously, Quartermain probably would have done that, right? He would have been that way. But it's just such a half and half between him that you're like, I just don't like you. He's not coming across as a flawed opium addict who is in despair over his two wives. He's just kind of a jerk.
He's kind of a jerk who's also attracted to her, and that's made clear in the comic, but not in the really not in.
They should have added that in the movie. Just
yeah. It's just, there's a lot going on that I just like, this is so much, and I'm just going to watch stuff explode, but I don't really care much for what's going on with the people.
Yeah, listen, and as we said, this movie does have an audience. I mean, this has 5.8 on IMDb, which isn't bad. It's not bad.
Oh, no.
And if you just put this on and background watch it, I think it's totally fine. And knowing what we know now, I understand a lot more of the production troubles, so I kind of understand the movie a little bit more and what they were going for. But I guess at the end of the day, I just like the execution of it more than or the idea of it more than the execution.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that this opens up a really interesting conversation for us to have. So one of the things that my followers on Instagram talked about, and I really wasn't involved in this conversation, I was just reading it, was that it didn't match the comic, and that's why people think it didn't do well. I always think that concept is a little bit strange because I immediately diverge the two. Like, if a comic book or even a regular book is made into a movie, they're like parallel stories. Like, they don't touch. Like, I don't need to read the comic book to understand the story. And in fact, if I think you have to read the comic book to understand the movie's a failure.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. So that was like but that was there's a major point in the books, or my followers, they're just saying it should have followed the comics. But my thing is, like, I've already read the comics. Like I don't want to see the same story again. Like, I would prefer it to be a little bit different.
And follow his Instagram, by the way. It's loaded with amazing stuff. He did a Jason Voorhees gag the other day that was pure gold.
I have one coming out tomorrow. That is Tom Cruise versus Tommy Wiseau.
And also one more thing. It's just so I think I've shared this if I've shared this on the podcast, just stop me and we'll tell you to go back to an episode to listen to it. But I managed Comic-Cons for years, and so I spent a lot of time around comic fans. And what I would ask people is, when they would complain about Superman, Batman, that's not my Superman, that's not my Batman. It's like, well, how many variations of Batman are there? How many variations of Superman are there? How many variations of Wolverine are there? Look at this movie as another graphic novel, as a death in a family, as just another chapter to add to the character. Because there's no way, with 7,000 different variations of Batman, you can't appease every fan with your Batman. And so with this movie, like everything you just told me, this wouldn't be, like Shane West said, this would be a $7 million movie. This wouldn't make much money if you had Rodney Skinner raping 3 women in the first 20 minutes. Like, you would have to go super Blade, super The Crow, I think, to make this work. But if you look at those budgets of those movies, they're not $100 million. So you can't do that.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. And even Deadpool was $35 million. It wasn't even close to $100 million. So it's just the context of it. It's not going to be your baby. It's going to be a different baby. Can I ask you a really random question? I want to see what you think about this and tell me if I'm going crazy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm a huge Mortal Kombat fan. I'm a huge Paul W. Anderson fan. And I was thinking about video game adaptations, and a lot of video game adaptations are not good, right? Objectively, subjectively, they're not good. But do you think video game fans don't like a lot of video game adaptations because they don't have control over it? They can't control it with their hands. They can't control it. Does that make sense? Video games, it's in your hands.
Yes, yeah.
It's yours.
Yes. But it's linear, I would say. It's mostly linear, because they have one story to tell, and there might be slightly different endings. Yeah. But yeah, that's really hard. it's a really interesting concept. I would say maybe not. I just think they're not as vocal as comic book nerds. Because for me, nerds. I mean, I'm a comic book nerd. I wrote my thesis on Superman. Like, let's be honest here. I know I've fallen out of it in the last, 5 years because it's been exhausting. I'll be honest with you about that. Just absolutely exhausting, the amount of negativity in the space.
It's been created. It's been allowed.
But what I was trying to get to was that it feels like in the comic community, they're very loud, very vocal, and they're trying to protect something that used to make them unique, and they own the space. And now it's crossed over to mainstream media, mainstream popularity, and they're trying to control the narrative, and they can't.
This isn't in the basement. This isn't Mallrats anymore with Bodhi in the basement.
No, not at all.
And he's cool, but he was that was such an interesting thing in '95, just seeing a cool comic book reader, because that's not what you associate. The Simpsons, right? The Simpsons comic book. Like, that's what you associated with comic people, and I think they were very defensive about that. You nailed it. You said it much more eloquently than I ever could. But nowadays, it's mainstream.
Yeah.
So you just have to roll with it.
Yeah. I mean, like, I remember being made fun of for reading Spawn in grade school and having comic books and collecting comic book cards and all that stuff. So I understand that wanting to protect something that you love, but just because like something's being remade or redone doesn't eliminate the thing you loved originally. This is sort of my thinking on retakes, right? Or remakes. It's like, okay, so they're doing a remake of what's I
think they're remaking the Nicole Kidman movie, The Others.
The Others, yeah. Others is great. But just because they remake The Others doesn't remove the other one, right? You can still go back and watch that one. You can ignore the remake that comes out. Maybe honestly the remake's not for you. Maybe it's for a younger generation who wants to see that story with their generation and their actors and slight different takes on it. This feels like a tangent we're going down.
Crazy, man? So, all right, let's say in 1990, right, so in 2000, right, I was 18 years old, and I kind of looked at maybe movies released in 1980 as being older. So now it's 2020, and movies back in 2000 might seem older. So remakes have always happened, so just do it. Like, just make sure it complements the movie as opposed to ripping it off, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's probably a pretty good chance that this is going to be remade if in the next 5 to 6 years. Like, this feels like we're in a comic book world. This is a comic book-ish movie or superhero-ish movie, and it could get picked up. I'd be very surprised if it didn't get picked up.
The concept. You walk into Universal, right? David, you just directed a movie called Hacksaw Debbie. It starred Sandra Bullock and Benjamin Bratt. They were so good in Demolition Man. You directed it, and it became a hit, right? We're talking $100 million back in '96. And you walk in with League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, you're going to get it. Like, it's a good idea. It's if you have some, like, so it's kind of a bummer that this, I don't know, whenever I think about this movie, I have a question for you. How many movies are better in your head than they are watching? So there's movies when you watch them and you're like, but then you think about it later and you're like, it's not that bad.
Yeah, I have 2 movies that we could do this with. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and Van Helsing. They're both better in my head than they are in real life.
Yeah.
And I have an actual one. I haven't had those. So those are examples. But a movie that I have not stopped thinking about since it came out, and this is not an exaggeration, is a movie called Assassination Nation.
Oh yeah, I watched that movie.
I remember watching it and going, I don't know if I get this. Is this okay? But it has stuck with me the entire time, and I'm pretty sure it's a really good movie that I just didn't get.
I felt like it took about 3 hours to finish, just because it's so ADD, I guess.
It had a lot to say, had a lot of themes that I was like, maybe I'm not the target audience with that.
No, that's funny you said that. And I just want to clarify something. When we compare The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and Van Helsing's the better movie. Correct? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. 100%.
And they both feature Richard Roxburgh. Let's do something. I want to have. Right, so what are you gonna say?
I was going to say they're like kissing cousins. These movies, their aesthetic is similar. Their thought process is similar. They're all trying to build like a big, big world that I mean, it feels like they were trying to come off the Matrix, like the Matrix mixed with X-Men. Like, these are what these all feel like.
I just think Van Helsing is told by a director in control, and The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is not.
Yeah. So I have a question that seems to permeate this movie is, did Americans get this? Like, was the studio correct in adding Tom Sawyer?
No, because What kids know Tim